I do have to quit my job because I, at the drop of a hat, have to show up at a lawyer's office. At the drop of a hat, need to run over to the jail to give information. I have two highly traumatized children, along with my own I'm raising, single mom. I cannot do all of it. At the same time, my mom got very sick. She's like in the hospital dying. So I have like no support system.
Hey everybody, how you doing today? Welcome to another edition of Another Nobody with me, Travis Myers. And today we have part one of a two-part episode with Michele Horton, okay? The author of a book called Dear Sister, which is a true crime story that sadly involves her sister, Nikki. All right, many of you may know the Nikki Addimando story, and if you don't, you're about to hear all about it now. Hey, Michele, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you.
Good. I'm so glad we're able to get together finally, because unbeknownst to our audience, we had a little technical difficulties, and just trying to get it together was a little bit difficult. But we're here today to talk to you about your super awesome book. I'll get it in the frame here. Sister Margaret. Okay, not even a few minutes in and I got to put the brakes on this already. I'm sorry, everybody. The book we're talking about is not Sister Margaret at all. This was my sister and I's first book, came out in 2020. What we're talking about today is Dear Sister, all right? Dear Sister. I apologize. Now, back to the show, which I read 1.5 times, okay? And I read it 1.5 times, and I'll tell everybody, besides that it was a great book, I was about halfway through and, doing that whole thing where you try to read it, and then I realized that it was on audio, right? So I tuned into the audio, and what I will tell everybody that's listening right now, what's great about the audio is that you have all these little clips in there that you've taken from the phone calls, from the police statements, from all the different things that you have, which was, to me, I think it added to the book quite a bit. Plus, you're a good reader. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, the audiobook is extra special to me for that reason.
Well, I thought it was too. And I enjoyed reading it. I found it very captivating. I'm sorry that you had to write it at all. And as we get into the story, people are going to realize that this is a true crime story. There's nothing fictional about this at all. So yeah, I'm sorry that it had to be written, but you did an excellent job putting it together. So
yeah, I appreciate.
Now, was it? I don't know when you decided to do it. Was it difficult to write this book? And I don't mean so much emotionally, but did you have to do a lot of research, or living it, was that enough for you?
Well, it was both. So a lot of the difficulty in writing the book was just kind of going back and piecing together all of the documentation I've done over the years, all of the experts I had met, just to learn things for myself. I kept notes, notebooks on notebooks of all of my things that I was learning, questions that I had, kind of interviews that I had done just for my own knowledge and for our committee and for our advocacy, not thinking it was going to be a book one day. So I had done a lot of the legwork in the years prior to sitting down and writing it. So it was more of going back and piecing it all together and making sure it all made sense and there weren't any holes, because it's so much material. It was so many transcripts to go through to make sure I had everything accurate. A lot of the quotes that I pulled, the dialogue that I recreated with people that are in positions of power, I wanted to make sure I covered all my bases and that it was 100% factual as possible. So a lot of that I pulled right from transcripts. So I was just using their own words instead of, remembering, just so everything was as factual as possible.
Well, it was. You did it again. From where what I read, you did an excellent job, and you were definitely on top of your detective work there. As far as the stuff with the audio, again, which fascinated me because I didn't expect it, especially after reading the book, again, about half the book, I didn't, the audio was a treat for me because of all the real things you were able to get. Was it difficult? Did the police departments or anybody involved give you a hard time releasing any of that information?
No, because what I used belonged to me and to Nikki. So it was part of discovery. So the prosecutors, they record everything. And then as part of the discovery, they hand over discs that contain all of it. So it was a little time consuming to like, nothing that the state does is like, I mean, in any aspect is like efficient. So it was, all this encryption and all of this stuff just to be able to like access it. But it was our information. So there were no legal barriers to.
They're very good.
Yeah.
And believe me, you don't have to explain how difficult it can be working with the state or for myself for the city, because I fully understand that.
Yeah.
So, all right. So as far as the book, I mean, again, I thought it was terrific. Now you have, and just so everybody knows, okay, the paperback came out on
Will come out on the 28th of January.
28th. Well, this will probably be released in February. So the 28th of January is the date when it comes out. Very good. Cool. So yeah, to research, what else did I want to ask you? I guess we can kind of start out. I'd like to start out with your childhood, you and your sister, how you grew up, and, just gives a little insight into your history.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so part of my motivation for wanting to write this book is that there's this case and it's, getting a lot of news coverage and people have a lot of opinions about it. But for me and for our family, it wasn't just a true crime, like crazy situation. It had roots from, through generations when it comes to domestic violence and, what women in our family, what we've allowed to happen to us. And it was important to me that we go back to kind of excavate what happened and how this began. Did you?
Well, part of what I don't want to interrupt you, but part of exactly what I think I liked so much about your book, and especially when it comes to true crime, where so many people fail. I don't want to say fail either, because that's a harsh word. But what you not only succeeded in, but excelled in, was painting the full picture of your lives. And I thought that was beautiful, because I felt, although it begins with the tragic event that starts everything off, every time you go back, I know more and more about you, about your sister, about your mother, about your father. And I really thought that was beautiful. I'm sorry, but go ahead. That's exactly what you wanted to do, so go ahead.
Yeah, it is, because specifically what I watched happen in the courtroom and in the media is that when things like this happen, the first thing that gets stripped away is your humanity. You just become a statistic. Even in the best situations when it comes to domestic violence advocacy, we do often kind of strip people down to numbers and percentages and small snapshots of their life instead of allowing people's true humanity. And what I watched, Nikki go in from the court system to the jail to the prison, so much of her humanity was taken from her. So my goal with this book was to give her back her humanity. And also, like you said, my mother and all of these people who, if you just read transcripts, people can be reduced to certain actions instead of seeing the totality of why people are the way that they are. And I don't think anything humanizes people better than really looking at them as children when they're innocent. And how did this come to be? And also, it's people want to think these things happen to other people who, are not them. But my experience with Nikki and I had a very normal childhood. We had a very normal nuclear family. To me, from the outside looking in, you wouldn't think all of the horrors that had happened to my sister already did, and that, looking ahead, that the path ahead would have been what it was for us, given we were middle class, public schools, dance, gymnastics, friends, sleepovers, just very, very normal for the 90s and the early 2000s.
Well, that's exactly how it appeared to me. And again, the book starts out with it starts off with a bang, but reading it, I'm like, yes, sounds like an idyllic family.
Yeah,
I mean, really, like you had a perfect childhood, again, as far
I
as you're
did.
concerned at the time.
My sister did,
Exactly.
but I did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, unfortunately, we'll get into that a little bit. You
yeah.
know, yeah, which is, you know, tragic all the way around. And so now, before we get to the actual date of the occurrence, which is kind of where the book starts, not doesn't really start, but kind of starts, or the story starts, I should say. Tell us a little bit about yourself too. I'm sorry that you did not have your marriage was already over and on the rocks because you had some issues with your husband at that time, correct?
Yeah. I didn't go into it as much in the book as I had originally planned, just because there was so much material that a lot of that
Yeah.
ended up getting kind of stripped out. But the context was that I had spent 10 years with a guy who I love very much. I had a son with, and he struggled through addiction and opiate addiction. And it like was the most harrowing experience that I thought I would ever have, was loving somebody who has an addiction, and it was destroying himself. It was destroying our relationship. I was, getting sick from it. It was starting to affect our son. And having to kind of extricate myself from that marriage was very difficult. I had to come to some hard terms through therapy that, I was never hit. He never raised his voice to me, but the financial and emotional situation I was in was abusive, that you can't really be with someone who is an addict in active addiction, who is hiding it and lying to you and manipulating and stealing from you, and have it not be abusive. So I kind of, prior to what happened with my sister, prior to even knowing she was in if domestic violence is a spectrum, she was at the extreme end of the spectrum. I am kind of like telling my family, like, oh my gosh, all these things I'm learning about abuse, and I'm going to the domestic violence shelter, and I'm having them come with me to court for child support, custody, and getting restraining orders, and going through all of that, when like my experience was, I know we can't compare, like it was abusive, and I did need to leave the relationship, but it was such a shock to then, within a year of knowing I needed to leave, getting the restraining orders, going through that terrible experience of separating from someone I loved and I had wanted to stay married to. And then seeing what my sister went through, I was like, whoa, this is beyond the scope of what I had ever imagined that I would be walking into. But because I did have this like strange little stint in the courts with Grace Smith House, which is our domestic violence agency, like I was primed a little bit to kind of understand the context of what happened to Nikki. I had like a little pre-education, which was very helpful. Then, of course, being thrown into the fire of what my sister had dealt with and what the courts she was now dealing with, it was like a deep learning experience, kind of like trial by fire, like thrown in the deep end and having to figure things out.
Yeah, with drugs on your end, drugs, alcohol, I mean, even gambling, any kind of serious addiction just wreaks havoc on families, and people quite often don't realize it. And it's not even a matter of being empathetic or sympathetic to the person who's abusing themselves, but it does. It destroys entire neighborhoods. It can, you know. And I'm very sorry that you had to go through that. But that kind of, what I liked about the way you wrote it in the book is, if we fast forward just a little bit to, what was it, September 28th, 2017,
Mm-hmm.
all right, when you were unfortunately woken up in the middle of the night, you never expected that. You had a whole different expectation from that door knock. If you know what I'm getting at, if you want to get, please tell up the story.
After my husband we separated, he really took a nosedive down. I kind of had this fantasy that like, oh, losing me would be so painful that he would give up the drugs, and that he really, like, once he didn't have me as like a tether, he just like it was darker than anything I could have imagined, what he was getting himself into, and it was getting into legal issues. And I was just waiting for the call that he was dead, whether he drove his car, into a wall, or he was arrested, or he overdosed, like whatever. Like I was waiting for that call. So
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you did have more than one either phone call or knock on your door concerning your husband, correct?
yep, I had the call of he was in a really bad accident. It's really, really bad. You need to get to the hospital. Like I had been preparing myself for him to die, and that I would have to explain this to my son for years, for years. Anyone who is loving someone who's struggling knows that, like, internal planning you have to do, because it's a very real possibility. So I was very kind of blinders on, laser focus, that this was like my biggest issue, and this was an inevitability, was that he was going to die. So when cops showed up in my door, it was the only thing I thought was happening. And then, so it was just kind of it took a minute for me to shift, to understand that, like, wait, they're not saying my husband's name. They're saying my sister's name, who's like, why would police be involved in her at all? Like, she's never been in trouble. She's my younger sister. She's such a good stay-at-home mom. She doesn't do anything besides just like be with her kids. Like, what could possibly have happened? And they wouldn't give me any information. They just said, she's fine. She's at the police station, and there are these two kids, your niece and nephew. They're 2 and 4. Like, someone's got to come get them. They need clothes. Like, they were very cryptic about like what happened to their clothes. They're like, and I'm like, okay, well, we'll go to their house to get clothes, and you can't go to the house. And I just was like, I had no context to like put the pieces together. Like, if I were like, I wonder if my sister killed Chris, and like that would never have even entered my mind as a possibility. That would have been so far-fetched.
Now, on my end, I've on many times been on the, as a police officer in the city, I've many times been on that other end of it, where people don't understand, because of the case and the sensitivity of the case, and not being the detective on the case. If it was uniformed police officer, they can't tell you anything.
Yeah.
And it's so unbelievable to you. How can you not tell me what's going on with my sister or my husband or whatever family member? But on our end, we can't jeopardize the case because we don't know ourselves. And it's an impossible place to be for you. It's just impossible. And on our end, trust me, it sucks, because I'm sorry, I can't tell you anything there. That's where it ends. And so that was just a god-awful experience. But I'm sorry, go ahead and continue.
Yeah. And then it was just, I kind of walk readers through that day of just kind of like going about my day as if it's normal, but in the back of my mind being like, what is happening? And just waiting for information. And then I got little pieces of information throughout the day, culminating into my mom calling me at work and saying, Nikki's been arrested for homicide. Chris is dead. And it was like a rug was ripped out, like reality turned upside down. Nothing made sense at all, except I knew I now had to deal with this. And I now had to like get information, figure out what happened. Abuse wasn't even in my radar. There was nothing that maybe it was an accident. Like I had no idea. It was just, okay, this is a crisis. And if you're using words like homicide, she could go to jail like forever. So I had no experience in criminal court ever.
Oh no!
No one in our family.
Your heart is racing 100 miles an hour. Your mind is spinning out of control. Because can you think of anything more shocking?
Yeah. No, I couldn't. I couldn't have.
Yeah.
Even now looking back, it's, this was 2017, 2025. It's still surreal for me to think about everything that happened. Like, I still can't believe that everything happened did.
Well, I do that when we're doing the storytelling thing, and I tell ridiculous stories from my life. I'll say a lot of times for me, it's not real. It's like a movie I watched once.
Yeah.
And that's me what does he say? Putting it into a compartment. I can never get that word out. Compartmentalizing it. But it's just the way that I do it. It's a movie I watched once,
Yeah.
and I put it away. So I completely understand what you're talking about there. So tell us then what happened. What did you learn about your sister's case?
I learned that she was in a severely abusive relationship that was not actually that hidden. She hid it from her family and from her closest friends for all of the reasons that victims hide them. Part safety, part shame, part wanting to just keep their life as normal as possible, hoping it all goes away, not wanting to be seen differently. I mean, et cetera, et cetera. But there were people in power, people who were in law enforcement, people who were in the DA's office, several people who had witnessed things like therapists, mental health professionals, more than one, had witnessed themselves what was going on, and nobody was able to get her safely out of the situation.
Yeah, we're going to talk about all these little spots here, because there are many steps that took you through all of this. But what did you learn particularly about the night of what happened, if you can describe that to us?
Yeah, I mean, just in general, what happened is that there were a lot of people who were increasingly concerned about Nikki. She was not able to hide the injuries as much as she had before. And I don't want to speak for her, but I think at some level, she was like, she felt so invisible in life that even going out with black eyes, people weren't going to say anything anyway. It was, that's her experience to kind of talk about, which I'm able to relay in the book just through our conversations. But, because that was one thing we did do in our jail visits is kind of go back and like talk about everything, all the things I missed. But yeah, that she was in a situation that a lot of people knew about, and a lot of people had tried very hard to get her out of this situation. And it's just not that easy to leave someone who is committed to continue to hurt you, especially
I've seen it. I've seen it so many, many times. I've seen it so many, many times. But for our listeners, again, just so they understand the story who haven't read the book, on that particular evening of, what was it, September 28th, what we're talking about, we understand it was a homicide, but your sister did, in fact, shoot her husband, or rather her boyfriend, that evening, in case anybody doesn't know what we're talking about yet.
Right. Yeah. So what happened was that in people being very not just people who were in power, but like people at nursery school, people who would just see her that didn't see her every day, like me or her friends, who kind of had like, I don't know, it's like, when you're too close to something to really see the truth of it, like people with fresh eyes who saw her were like concerned, and they're like, what do we do? And somebody was like, I'm just going to call CPS because these kids are in danger. She's clearly being abused. Nobody's doing anything about this. This is insane. The person who called, it was a teacher. I'm a mandated reporter. The person who called CPS worked with Chris, saw his temper, put the pieces together and said, he is hurting her and someone needs to do something. So they thought they were doing the right thing by calling CPS. CPS comes and investigates. Child Protective Services here in New York. I might be calling something different elsewhere. They come, they interview them. Nikki lies and says she's safe. She lies and says there's not a gun in the house because what else is she going to do? Because these people are going to leave. And if he overheard something, she could be in danger. She just wants this to go away because she knows now I'm in much more danger because he is losing control. And that's the most dangerous thing for an abuser at that level to, yeah.
And it's such a terrifying place to be because here she's afraid of her husband, I keep saying husband, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Her boyfriend, Chris, okay? She's afraid of Chris. She also still loves Chris. She also is desperately afraid of losing her children because nobody wants to put them into the system, And people don't realize no matter how nice things are, when CPS, again, Child Protective Services, comes to your house to investigate, If you answer any one of those questions wrong, those kids are going to be gone.
Right.
And they might be gone for days. They might be gone for weeks. They might be gone for months. You don't know when you're going to get them back. And so what does she do?
And
she keeps her mouth shut and she lies.
And also because she could be charged with failure to protect her children.
Absolutely.
She's aware that there's abuse going on, even if it's not to them, but if they could witness it at any point, which she didn't think at the time that they did, which they did, but then she could be charged, which is just another reason for victims to not want to tell the truth, because they think they're going to be the ones who are held accountable for someone else's actions. So for all of those reasons, she doesn't say anything. The Child Protective Services leaves. Within hours, there's a gun pointing at her. She is lucky enough to get the gun and shoots it. It wasn't even like when, Nikki and I have talked about this a million times, and people, especially the courts, they want to like hone in on this thing that happened, that it's like, we'll know if she's guilty or innocent by what she does in this 5 seconds that she has the gun in her hand. As if she's sitting there and she's making a pros and cons list in her head, or she's planning this out. She knows she has a gun. She doesn't even know if it's going to go off. She's just hoping it does. She knows that if he gets a hold of that, he is going to kill her and kill himself, because that's what he said he would do. And she's thinking about her children. And from her perspective, it wasn't a choice. She didn't say like, I made the choice to live, even, which is something that like our committee said, like, when we're trying to advocate for her, like, how unfair is it that she made a choice to live and she's being punished? It wasn't even a choice. It was a survival instinct. It was not even a thought. It was her body knowing, I need to protect my children more than anything. And so she pulled the trigger, killed him in one shot. She freaks out and she goes to get help. She goes to the police and is like,
yes,
this is what happened. And they immediately don't believe her. Yeah. They concoct a story.
Let's do something again before we get to the police part and all the court system. Let's go back a little bit more and just talk about, your not just your sister, or I should say Nikki's unbelievable secret that she had kept from you for so long, but her secrets all the way back to childhood, because this, unfortunately, abuse was a thread that ran through her entire life. Am I right?
Sexual abuse, yeah. Right. Yeah.
It is fair to say that, really, well, she was a very young girl when it started, but I'm not here to tell the story. You are, so if you can enlighten us a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately something that way too many children understand, is that someone you love and you trust, which in her case was her best friend's grandfather at the house right across the street from our house. He sexually abused her. He also sexually abused my sister's friend, the daughter who lived there, and she never got help for it. She tried to talk to my mom about it, which is a scene. It's actually, I think, maybe my favorite chapter in the book. It's a chapter called Wolves, and it's about her kind of going back in time and saying, I did tell my mom, I did try. She doesn't remember what she said, but she knows she tried to tell her what happened. She was in kindergarten. She's a baby. And what she
is like literally 5-6 years old at this age.
Yeah. And so it's impossible to know exactly what she said, but there were enough signs that something was going on with her. Just, finding blood in her underwear and all of these things that, starting to wet the bed, things that could be signs of sexual abuse. She says what happens, and my mom tells her the story of the boy who cried wolf, saying, be careful what you say. People are going to say you're a liar. People are going to say you're not, they don't believe you, which isn't wrong. Like, that is actually what happens when girls and women say what has happened to their body. Their response is typically to say, we don't believe you. But that teaching story really laid the groundwork for a lot of what my sister was going to experience, because again and again, more than one person in her life has taken advantage of her vulnerability, because, in the sense of her sexuality, she's a 5-year-old because she was kind of frozen in that time where she was first violated. And many men throughout her life have honed in on that vulnerability and taken advantage of her. And it just kind of culminated into the situation with Chris, where with each baby she birthed for him, the tether was stronger to him. And each time the abuse ticked up really dangerously. We're talking about strangulation, recording her against her will and uploading it to the internet. All these rape videos, which people viewed, which only compounded the shame that she felt. These videos were witnessed by police. They were incredibly disturbing. But when you put it in the context of online pornography in our rape culture, it's so easy to normalize it and say, like, oh, these women are they probably consented. They're probably just acting. And so when all of this came to light, to me, it's like, this is a slam dunk. Not only did this guy abuse her, not only do we have people who see the ligature marks on her neck and her eyes being bloodshot, we see she's going and getting forensic nurse exams from people who are documenting these heinous injuries, burns all over her body. Sorry, there's motorcycles going by. I don't know if you can hear that. And the fact that the abuse was filmed and viewed by police and district attorneys, and like, oh my God, like, this is just so much more evidence than most victims have. It seemed like,
and not to get ahead of ourselves yet either, but your sister too, from again the way it reads, her entire life was it seemed like a very quiet, fairly submissive person. Out of the two of you, she was the good girl, right? Not that you were a bad girl at all.
good girl too.
But she sounded like she was just
Yeah.
the sweetest, quietest, never raised a fuss about anything.
She just wanted to be a mom.
Right.
But she also, like, I also think it's dangerous to, in the scheme of like humans, she was very sweet and submissive, but like she also could push back and she also could get angry like as any person. And I think
well, I know you're right about arguments and things like that.
Yeah.
In general, she was a very easygoing person.
Yes, in general it was. Which was like, in so many ways, she kind of was this kind of model perfect victim, even though that's not a thing and we should never hold anyone to that standard. She didn't have a criminal record. She didn't have a drug problem. Like, so many people cope with abuse by self-soothing with things that are self-destructive. She didn't do that. She just poured herself into her kids, being the best mom she could be and being as present as she could for them, despite all of the horrors that he was subjecting her to at night, for his own sick, like truly sick. I can't even begin to understand his motivations, but
things like that. I'm so happy that those tendencies, all right, desires, fetishes, whatever word you want to use, are not part of my makeup at all. I don't understand it at all. When it comes to abusing other people, it's something that does not fit in my brain.
I also think that if somebody, I mean, I can't psychoanalyze him because he's not here and there's so much I don't know. But from looking at his online pornography usage, just from what came back in the discovery from prosecutors, the amount he was consuming and the kinds of sites he was on,
yes.
When, like, even looking at that case that happened in France, where there's all of those men who were willing to rape that unconscious wife, when you're kind of in this pack mentality where it's normalized and addiction, I learned that pornography addiction lights up the same way as opiate addiction. I understand the way an opiate addiction can kind of take away someone's, not soul, but like really darken somebody. And I can imagine it's even more with pornography addiction when you're...
Well, I've read, I've taken classes. Pornography, is a snowball effect. People that are drawn to it, truly drawn to it, it's especially today with today's phones and today's computers,
Mhm.
you're always clicking for the next more dramatic thing, and in his particular case, he was interested for whatever reason in violence and subjugation of women. And it just, I assume, got worse and worse and worse. And again, being a young man, he probably started this, in his late teens, early 20s, you know,
Totally. Yeah.
and it just consumed him after a while.
I had a conversation with Nikki's former therapist, Sarah, who's a character, I say in quotes, throughout the book. She's a human, but she was kind of like a,
And she, not to interrupt you, she was, what you wrote about her in the book, she was phenomenal. Someday I think I would love to have a conversation with.
she,
She seems like a dynamite girl.
yeah, she really is. And she was kind of just grounding, educating force for me throughout it to kind of hold my hand through it. But she was telling me that with pornography addiction, it's not a chemical like a substance is. It's what you're addicted to is the taboo. So as you are getting further into your addiction, the
Sure.
more taboo, which is, where he landed on the internet was very dark and not okay. But where that leads to is child pornography. And that when, the child pornography, we know from just the news, like all of these people have images. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are pedophiles, but that it's like the end of the taboo. Like,
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, you see that quite often with not only sexual predators, but even with your serial killer types. When you watch the documentary on HBO or wherever you're watching it, Netflix, and they start from the first attack quite often isn't even a murder, and then they have the first murder, but that murder wasn't quite gruesome enough, so they have to do it again and again and again. And now by the time they're 30, 40, 50 incidents in, they're complete monsters. Not that the first time was okay, but it only progresses in the worst direction. It never progresses in a better direction,
Right.
and that's probably very much what happened to Chris.
Yeah. And the fact, he was a quote unquote really nice guy. He worked with kids.
Yes.
He was a gymnastics coach. He was a person of authority to children. And people like that can really fly under the radar because you would think, well, this person would never. And also, they have more reason than anyone to hide it because their entire life is at stake. Like what he would lose is massive because of his standing in the community.
Absolutely. Listen, on this point here, we're going to take just a little break, and we're going to come right back. Okay? So 1 second.
Okay.
Listen up, this one's important. As a rule, I never stump for charities, because most of them don't hand out as much money as they collect, and that's a sad fact. But not Tunnel to Towers. These guys do the right thing. They have an A+ rating from Charity Watch, and a 4-star rating from Charity Navigator. That's like the #1 charity watchdog group, with over 93% going towards the families of veterans and first responders who have lost their lives in the line of duty. For only $11 a month, and it's easy. Just go to t2t.org. That's letter T, number 2, letter T.org, and hit the donate button. Do the right thing and do good for the families and the veterans and the first responders who do good by you. It's only $11 a month. Thanks, and all the best.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. So where were we, Michelle? We were talking about Chris and all of his problems, but I'd like to return back to, again, the night of the act on September 28th and talk about, how you kind of not only were introduced to this by the police, but how it progressed through the courts.
Yeah. So in the beginning, the information I'm getting is from public defenders because we didn't have a lawyer on retainer. This is not something that we had any experience with. And when you have something like an affirmative defense where she's saying, yes, I did pull the trigger, but there's a reason. And the reason is rooted in gender-based violence. You really need a specific kind of expert lawyer, which there isn't a lot of them.
And again, not to interrupt, I'm sorry.
No.
But for our listeners to know, there was really very, very little police activity here. As far as the police were concerned, it was a closed case because within their first literally minutes, if not seconds of interaction, she said, I need help. I just shot my husband.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to tell that little bit of the story, how she got stopped at the stoplight.
Yeah.
And just so they know, again, there was no, I mean, this, as far as the police department it was a closed case. Done deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And the night of, it had been so, like, there's so much information out there, like news, 48 hours, 2020, like all of these, they like really hone in on this. So like anyone who's interested can definitely do a deep dive on it. But like the general story that is not contested is that she shot him. She freaked out, obviously. She went to get her babies in the next room who were sleeping, picked them up, turned off the lights so they didn't see anything. She ran out to the car in her socks. This was not planned. She didn't have a bag packed. She did nothing. So she put them in the car and she doesn't know what to do. So she calls Sarah, who we talked about, who was her therapist, and leaves her a message. This is like early hours of the morning. She then calls Elizabeth, who is another person I talk about in the book quite a lot because Elizabeth was her first confidant, was someone who saw her. It was her son's music teacher, and said, I'm seeing these injuries on you. And it took a while to gain her trust, Nikki's trust, but with Sarah's encouragement to let Elizabeth in, because it was, again, reaching a point where Nicky was going to die. That was the trajectory of this. This was going to end in homicide, and Nicky was the one who was going to end up dead. She needed a friend. So she let Elizabeth in. So she called Elizabeth and said, I don't know what to do. Like, so she was just going to drive to her house. She was just kind of in a fog, from what I understand. Like, she's just in total trauma, like survival mode. So she's stopped at a red light. Like, it's so like cinematic in like the freeze state. Like, she's in a freeze state. She can't move. She's having trouble even speaking. And the light turns green and she doesn't move.
Sure.
Totally. So she sees that the person behind her at the light is a cop. So she stops the car and she gets out in her socks and says what happened. All of that's recorded on dash cam footage, which, you know, is torn apart in court between, like, you know, at one point you can see her like wringing her hands out. And the prosecutor describes it as drama hands, like she's just like putting on an act. But
yes,
Nikki's body, her hands are going numb because she's, you know, in shock, and that's how the trauma is in her body. She's like losing sensation in her hands. She's panicked. So from her perspective, she's going to say, this is what happened. And they go to the house and they find him.
An unbelievably emotional state.
She has her babies in the car. They're in diapers. You know, they're not knowing what's going on. She's in a state. So she's going to them saying, like, help me. At one point in the dash cam footage, you can hear her say, oh my God, it's over. Like, this horror she had been living with for so long was now, to her, was over, when in reality, the next horror was about to begin. She wasn't going to put on shoes yet until she's in the next place that's going to re-traumatize her. So they bring her to the police station. She tells her kids, I'll be right back. They sit in the waiting area with Elizabeth, and then she doesn't see them again for 9 months. That's basically what happens.
Yep. And now for you, obviously, the next day unfolded, and you have to put all of this together, right? Yeah. And you started out, you know, as so many, many, many people do, with a public defender, who you liked.
We really liked her. We continue to like her to this day. She is, having a woman was really important to Nikki because of everything she had gone through to gain trust. She felt like she could connect more with a woman. She felt less judged. And just who this woman was, her name was Kara. Nikki just clicked with her, which is very rare, very, very rare. So we were, trying to hire other people because we were told you don't want a public defender. They're too busy. You need a private attorney. Our family doesn't have money, but we're like, we're going to figure this out. Like, you need the best representation. So we're out in the world, like interviewing people and trying to find the right attorneys. But Nikki really did bond with the public defender. And ultimately, we decided to stick with her because she was really doing the work to understand domestic violence and trauma and really like
she found this was a case she could really stick her teeth into.
Well,
in a positive way.
She said she had never in her career ever had so many people call to be witnesses for a defendant.
Yes.
It was the consistent story. Every single person she talked to, no matter how they knew Nikki, was that she was, talking about her character, looking at her criminal record, which there was none, her as a mother, and then knowing the abuse and also seeing how much was documented. It seemed like this is a very clear case. She just had to wrap her head around how to present it to a grand jury. But she was, yes, you go ahead.
Well, before you get to where you're going, because I think I know where you're going, but you then, during all of this, and again, your head is spinning, you actually quit your job so you could take care of your sister.
Yeah.
And to do all of this paperwork and all of the logistics that your sister simply cannot do from a prison cell. Right? And the district attorney in your county, for some reason that I still don't quite understand, got a district attorney from another county to send an ADA up to do this case.
Yeah, well, I can tell you why that happened.
Yeah, well, we're going to get to it, but at first, you, when you met with this district attorney, as people do, you go and you meet the district attorney, you have your meetings. She also seemed to be fairly understanding in the beginning, was she not? Did she not give you a friendly face?
Well, you're talking about the ABA.
I'm talking about Hannah Krause.
Yes. She came in with seemingly goodwill, saying, listen, this isn't my jurisdiction.
Yes.
This isn't my town. I have one motivation, and that's to find the truth.
Correct.
That's it. I spent years in the Bronx DA's office working with defending victims. Basically, like she was prosecuting domestic violence abusers. That was her, and sex crimes. That was her.
The way she presented herself and the way she spoke to you, you did feel that she was an ally in the beginning.
Yeah, and also I didn't have the concept of. I was a bit more naive at the time, because you think prosecutors, good guys, right? Like you think. They are protecting communities. They are elected, and the people who ADAs work for the elected person who works for us, for the community. So, just kind of like the standard government lessons that you get growing up in public school. I didn't, and also my experience as a privileged white person in middle class, New York I never had experiences feeling like the law was against me in any way. So I didn't have my guard up in the way that now, if a prosecutor wants to talk to me, I would have a very different approach.
Correct. And that, well, I know you say later on in the book when you have, well, let's get back to how the attorney that you wanted, the public defender, didn't work out.
Yeah. So the brief overview, which I really do kind of like, that was one of the hardest parts of the book, truly, was to kind of walk people through it in a way that was understandable because there's so many moving pieces. So we had the public defender. She was working with our Dutchess County District Attorney's Office, who it seemed like a good thing because the Dutchess County District Attorney's Office only knew Nikki as a victim. They had police officers come with files saying, I've been tracking this guy. He's a bad guy. I want to arrest him, but she won't sign because she's scared. So I need to be able to arrest him without her participation. And for whatever reason, the DA's office just didn't pursue it. They checked in on Nikki. They recognized that she was a victim. The exact same person, the ADA, another woman, her name was Christine, who was assigned to prosecute the case, she was the one who was checking in on Nikki. She was the one who earlier that year had a rape case, and Chris was on the jury, and she took him off because she knew of his name.
No.
So she knew enough that when now Nikki is being brought in as a defendant, she couldn't ethically prosecute because she knew too much about the situation. In reality, what she could have done is said, we can't press charges because I know this full story and this is a victim and I'm not going to prosecute a victim. She didn't do that. Who knows why? Maybe it was pressure from her boss. I don't know. But for whatever reason, the district attorney's office was very quiet. They never said any of this to the public. They just quietly stepped away and said, for reasons we are not able to share, we cannot prosecute. And the media and the people who read the media had all sorts of wild theories about what that is. None of it was true. And so they passed it to Putnam County, which is our county to the south.
Yes.
Which is when Hannah Kraus steps in, again, working with our public defender. These are two women, all women, actually. The first ADA, second ADA, and the public defender, all women. And Kara, the public defender, says, Hannah, this woman, I don't think she's that bad. I've been doing some research and, I think she's smart. I think she's going to do the right thing. And for reasons that I will never know, things go south really quickly. It takes a very long time for Hannah to investigate, months and months. Throughout this time, I do have to quit my job because I, at the drop of a hat, have to show up at a lawyer's office. At the drop of a hat, need to run over to the jail to give information. I have two highly traumatized children, along with my own I'm raising, single mom. I cannot do all of it. At the same time, my mom got very sick. She's in the hospital dying. So I have no support system.
Again, for our listeners, just to drill that into your head, here we have a single mother, all right, who is now the de facto mother of 3 children, not one, and that happened overnight.
Yeah.
These kids, you like everybody, you're struggling to make it to begin with. Taking care of your son on your own, and now you have 2 extra kids, a sister, and all the expense and trouble and time you got to spend to try to keep her, the case going well, is what I should say. And now your mother's sick on top of it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a really, really bad time. But Hannah, the prosecutor, just really did not take any of that into consideration. She didn't take into account that every day that was taking for her to investigate these claims, these kids haven't even seen their mother's face because we didn't want to bring them to a jail, which for a lot of reasons would have been re-traumatizing for them. It was not a good jail. I mean, I can't imagine many jails are good jails, but this one was ranked one of the worst in the state.
And we're talking about at the time, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old?
4-year-old.
2-year-old and a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
So no, you don't want to take them to jail with you.
And if we did, they'd want to hold their mother. They'd want to sit in her lap. And you can't do that when you're in a visiting room. You have to sit on your bottoms. You can't make a fuss. Otherwise you get kicked out. And then it's a co-ed jail, obviously. When we're in visiting rooms, it's mostly men. It is the body odor smells are very strong. It's very loud. People are fighting. People are, it's just not a good environment to bring these 2 kids particularly.
Not at all.
And we're just hoping okay, maybe a few more weeks, maybe another month. We were not seeing this as something that was going to go to trial. We were just waiting for the prosecutors to see this for what it was, drop the charges, or what seemed likely was bring it to a grand jury and have a grand jury say, you cannot pursue these charges. And then it would end. So all of that time.
It took quite a while to go to grand jury for indictment, didn't it?
So she was arrested at the end of September, and by June,
yes,
there was not an indictment. So what ended up actually happening is right before it was legally allowable, the prosecutor had to bring this to a grand jury.
Mm-hmm.
What Hannah did was put in a motion to remove Nikki's attorney, which was a wild move to anyone who was in our world I had a whole sounding board of people who were lawyers or former cops or all these people who were kind of like explaining the system to me. They were like, this is not going to stick. This is a Hail Mary. This is like,
Yep.
She's scared because she doesn't have a case and she's pulling out whatever she can. There was no reason that Nikki's public defender should be pulled. But she made an argument that someone, a previous abuser of Nikki's, someone that Nikki had never formally named, just in therapy in private spaces, said, this man hurt me prior to Chris. That person was defended by the public defender's office for a DWI, completely unrelated to Nikki. Years before, Nikki's public defender didn't even work there at the time. So we were like, okay, this isn't going to work. But the judge, which was our first inclination that, okay, something rotten is going on here. The judge agreed that for Nikki's benefit, right? Everything is like, for the defendant, we're going to remove someone who's been working on the case for 8 months, who Nikki trusts. And Hannah had been listening to all of our calls. Like I said, we got all of, and I was not the brightest. Nikki wasn't the brightest. We're not thinking that people are listening to us for nefarious reasons. So they know Nikki's connected to her. They know that Kara believes Nikki and is willing to fight for her. And she successfully gets her representation removed. We don't have a backup. We're scrambling. This is right before the grand jury. They're like, as you know, the grand jury is completely run by the prosecutor. So yes. Nikki doesn't even need to have representation for this to happen.
Nope, not at all.
So it's like, it was just such an insane time where that happened. And then immediately after that, Nikki's replacement public defender filed a writ for habeas corpus and was like, enough is enough. This is insane. Like, get this to a grand jury or like drop it. Like, her human rights are being violated. So Nikki ended up being released for a few days, which is when she reunited with the kids, which is a part I always knew. Like, when I was thinking about writing a book, I'm like, this is a reason to write the book so that people can see the emotion of her just coming out of jail after 9 months, emaciated.
Yes.
I mean, the fact she can even walk upright is incredible. She's so malnourished.
I actually saw the videos on YouTube. After I had first contacted you and we decided to do this, did a little investigative work myself, found out as much as I could. And it was, it brings a tear to your eye. It's very, very sad. It's that both, that heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time.
Yeah. Yes. And that's what I felt like people needed to see to understand the humanity of what it's like when you're separating a loving mother from her very connected children at such a young age. It takes a real psychological and emotional toll on everyone, especially those kids. And so raising them, their experiences were so erased every step of the way. And I really wanted to honor their love and their pain. And that was all really demonstrated when Nikki came home. And then 12 days later, after we hired these private attorneys and we're raising all this money that we don't have. And
that was a giant turning point in the book, though, too, or in the story, I should say, is here the public defender that you like is basically stolen from you, right? You're now 9 months into it, and bang, you got to find yourself a new counsel immediately and find a way to pay for it.
Right.
Okay, that's it for episode number 1 with Michele Horton. Now, if you think this is an interesting story so far, please tune in next week to hear how it ends. It's a wild story, I promise you that. Until next time, my friends, thank you very much. All the best. Goodbye.
Listen up. This one's important. I'd like to try to encourage you, please, to give to the Stephen Siller Foundation, Tunnel to Towers, at T2T.org. That's letter T, number 2, letter T.org. Do good for those who've done good for you.